Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Great Hall at the Arts Centre. I'm glad you found us because we were supposed to be in Rutherford's Den, but this gives us a lot more space to spread out and enjoy this afternoon. Today we have Dr. Olga Suvorova, who's an independent researcher, cultural historian, linguist and translator with her. In addition to teaching and translating and interpreting, she enjoys fascinating little-known, unheard or forgotten stories of cultural history and language that help us connect and understand cross-cultural links between various ethnic groups and countries. Olga has a PhD in cultural studies in the field of intercultural communication from Russia's oldest university, the Lomonosov Moscow State University, from 1755. No, that was when the university started, not when Olga graduated, sorry. Gosh. She's most recently published a research paper called Rutherford and Russian Physics, the Critical Influence of the Human Factor in the Journal of the Royal Society of New Zealand. And she's here to tell us about that today. So put your hands together for Olga. Thank you.
From the letter of Piotr Kapitsa to Ernest Rutherford, Hotel Metropole, Moscow, 20th of October, 1935. My dear Professor, life is an incomprehensible thing. We have difficulties in clearing up single physical phenomena, so I suppose humanity will never disentangle the fate of a human being, especially as complicated as my own. It is such a complexity of all sorts of phenomena that it is better not to question its logical coherence. After all, we are only small particles of floating matter in a stream which we call fate. All that we can manage is to deflect slightly our track and keep afloat. The stream governs us. The stream carrying a Russian is fresh, vigorous, even fascinating, and consequently rough. Jena mana, jena woka, jena reo, jena rangatira ma. We know a tene fare, tene като, tene като, tene като, като. Приветствую вас из разных уголков земли, с разными языками. Уважаемые гости, добро пожаловать в этот зал, добро пожаловать всем. Kia ora everyone, and thank you for coming here today. I'm greatly honored by the invitation of the Rutherford's Den and Susan Hansen of the Arts Centre in Christchurch to speak to you on my research of Lord Rutherford and his Russian connections, dedicated to the 150th birth anniversary of this remarkable New Zealander and an outstanding scientist. In my talk today, I will refer to my paper published earlier this year in the Journal of the Royal Society of New Zealand. I will provide some examples of Rutherford's civic contributions to Russian physics and emphasize Rutherford's faith and talent and reputation, his brilliant organizational skills, his promotion of diversity and inclusion in science, his technical support of Russia, and his lesson to stand up for oneself and for others. My primary sources have included private correspondence between Rutherford and Russian scientists, also their letters, diaries, photos, and publications in Russian and in English, touching on their experience of working with Rutherford, some previously unpublished and unknown to academia. I have been working on this topic for the last 5 years, and I'm especially thankful to Dr. John Campbell from University of Canterbury, who I hope is with us today, Honorary Margaret Austin, patron and trustee of Rutherford's Den, whom I wish a speedy recovery from her recent injury. Also to Dr. Tatiana Balakhovskaya, director of the Kapitsa Memorial Museum in Moscow, academician Boris Stechkin, great-grandson of one of the Russian students of Rutherford, Professor Nikolai Shilov, Associate Professor Rebecca Priestley, Victoria University of Wellington, Dr. Valery Edelman, Kapitsa Institute for Physical Problems of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor Michael Kelly from University of Cambridge, Dr. Daniel Schumacher, University of Otago, Professor Dr. Dirk van Delft from Leiden University, Professor Paul Moon from Auckland University of Technology for the encouragement they gave me, for their stimulating discussions on the topic and assistance in collecting various photographs, correspondence, and other primary sources. Susan, video, please.
If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream, and not make dreams your master, if you can think, and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to, broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose, and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Some of the greatest achievements in the history of science are associated with the name of Ernest Rutherford. Today, Rutherford symbolizes the values of the true scientist, such as originality of thinking, scientific intuition, bold imagination, and the art of experiment. However, for many of his Russian students, in addition to all the above qualities, Rutherford's personal qualities, principles, values, and leadership played a most important part in helping shape their civic position and moral values in the maelstrom that was the history of Russia and Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Ernest Rutherford was born in 1871 at Spring Grove in rural Nelson, New Zealand, the fourth child of 12, born of a farmer and a school teacher. In 1894, he won a scholarship to Cambridge University. In fact, he was the second candidate, but the first candidate decided not to go. In Cambridge, Rutherford at first worked as a research student under Sir Joseph Thomson. In 1898, he became professor of physics at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. There, working with chemist Frederick Soddy, he proposed that radioactivity results from the disintegration of atoms. In 1907, Rutherford returned to England to become professor of physics at Manchester University. In 1908, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. In 1914, he was knighted, but the war interrupted his work. He helped to develop methods of dealing with submarine warfare, as well as studying underwater acoustics. In In 1917, he returned to physics and a long series of experiments in which he discovered that the nuclei of certain light elements, such as nitrogen, could be disintegrated by the impact of energetic alpha particles coming from some radioactive source, and that during this process fast protons were emitted. This was the first artificially induced nuclear reaction. Rutherford had virtually created a new discipline, that of nuclear physics. In 1919, Rutherford became professor of experimental physics and director of the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, succeeding Thomson. Many of his students went on to become pioneering scientists. From 1925 to 1930, he was president of the Royal Society. In 1931, he was awarded a life peerage and died in October 1937. He was buried in Westminster Abbey. One of the most recognizable items of Rutherford's memorabilia is the highest value $100 denomination banknote issued by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand depicting Lord Rutherford of Nelson. Also depicted on the banknote is the Nobel Prize Medal in Chemistry won by Rutherford in 1908 for his investigations into the disintegration of the elements and the chemistry of radioactive substances. Overlaying the medallion is a graph plotting the results from Lord Rutherford's investigations into naturally occurring radioactivity. The tuku-tuku panel used as a background on the $100 note is called Whakaaro Katahi from the Wharenua Kati at Whakatumarai in Nelson, close to Rutherford's birthplace. On the reverse of the note is depicted a South Island licking moth. It can be found in Fiordland beech forests and a mohua, or yellowhead, a small and colorful bird. It nests in tree holes, making it vulnerable to predators. It can be found in small isolated populations in the South Island and on islands of Stewart Island, Rakiura. Mohua is one of the endangered species, is a wonderful symbol of modesty, dignity, and a rare talent. The wrought iron gate opened with a loud squeak, and as if through a magical portal, I stepped from a bright and noisy summery Moscow street into a spacious and shady English-style park with winding paths and an artificial pond where several ducks were swimming in a most important manner. Tucked deep within the Institute's grounds is the Kapitsa Memorial Museum, a fusion of a charming and old-fashioned Cambridge-style two-story house and a archetypal Soviet neoclassical building. Over the past several years, I have visited this museum many times. Here I have worked with correspondence between Rutherford and Kapitsa, examined a rare collection of Kapitsa's personal belongings and unique photographs, awards and academic robes, and familiarized myself with that part of Kapitsa's equipment for conducting experiments which the Soviet government had bought from the Mont Laboratory in Cambridge with the assistance of Lord Rutherford in 1935. As on previous occasions, Dr. Tatiana Balakhovskaya, the director of the museum and a family friend of the Kapitsas, walked me into the spacious living room to welcome me with a cup of tea. That day, a physicist, Dr. Valery Edelman, was finishing his lunch in an armchair by the unlit fireplace, enjoying traditional Russian fare of buckwheat porridge, soft cheese, and a black tea with lemon. He was eager to add some evidential accounts to my research. Dr. Edelman recounted how when Pyotr Kapitsa was the director of the Institute, there had been a young Soviet PhD student who was not performing well enough to be offered a position after completing his PhD. Despite that, Kapitsa insisted that the PhD graduate remain at the Institute on the grounds that the graduate with his large mustache looked very much like Kapitsa's mentor, Ernest Rutherford. When his academics had commented on the poor performance and ingenue nature of the young scientist, Kapitsa had retorted, "So what? Rutherford had the appearance of a bumpkin, but what a remarkable genius he was." The Russian Rutherford, as the institute staff had nicknamed that Soviet graduate, failed to prove that he was a genius. Was it an ironic coincidence, or was it more than that? Dr. Edelman wondered that when 6 months later the student shaved off his mustache, he lost his position at the Kapitsa Institute, having strayed too far in substance and in appearance from the institute's needs. The recreation of an English park and Cambridge-style buildings in the foreign field of Moscow, and in his defense of his own Russian Rutherford, are eloquent testimony to the immense formative effect of Kapitsa of his time in Cambridge under his mentor and friend Rutherford. They are two of Russian scientists' many tributes to this great man, and all that he represented both as a scientist and as a human being. In the 19th century, on the threshold of the 20th century, leading Russian professors of natural sciences sought their doctoral degrees at German universities. Fluency in German was expected of such Russian professors, as German was seen in Russia as the language of science. In Imperial Russia, the study of physics developed rapidly, and the leading academic centers for this were Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kiev, and Warsaw. Moscow was renowned for its experimental physicists, whereas St. Petersburg historically focused more on theoretical physicists. The success of Rutherford's work on the study of radioactivity and the prominence accorded it by the awarding of his Nobel Prize in 1908 generated considerable interest in Russian scientific circles and was widely discussed among Russian chemical physicists. In addition to translating Rutherford's works and incorporating his scientific achievements into their own research projects, the key research institutes of Imperial Russia began investigating the opportunities for having their scholars trained by Rutherford. Before the collapse of Imperial Russia in 1917, a significant number of students and scholars from the Russian Empire worked in Rutherford's Manchester laboratory. Most well known of them were Georgy Antonov, Vasily Borodovsky, Konstantin Yakovlev, Jadwiga Schmidt, Stanislav Luria, Bogdan Shishkovsky, Stanislav Kalandyk, and Nikolai Shilov. Inevitably, the First World War had a major impact. Russian science was deprived of funding because of wartime exigencies. Any available funds went to the Russian army. At that same time, the nature of the war brought home the importance of applied physics and the technical professions. The Bolshevik takeover in 1917 ushered in a bleak period for Russian science. In 1920, in the middle of the Russian Civil War in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, when the institutes could not be heated during the harsh Russian winters, staff were starving, and the majority of students left, a Russian translation of Rutherford's brochure, Bombardment of Atoms and Decomposition of Nitrogen, was published. Arguably, this was the first Rutherford's work published in Russia. And it came only 2 years after Rutherford's discovery of the transformation of elements, or in modern terminology, nuclear reactions. The Russian brochure contained 4 drawings and the annotation. This is a report in which the modern alchemist sets out his discovery, the decomposition of nitrogen. The brochure assumes a trained reader. The ground for this seminal publication has been prepared 4 years before, when Avram Yoffe, the head physicist of the Polytechnical Institute, had organized the so-called Rutherford seminars, at which young Russian graduates from the Polytechnic Institute and from Petrograd University discussed Rutherford's works. What was effectively a scientific blockade of Russia, which had lasted 6 years from the beginning of the First World War, was finally broken when the very first Soviet scientific delegation, headed by Yoffe, was permitted to visit Europe in 1921. The purpose of Yoffe's mission was to re-establish academic contacts and to purchase laboratory equipment and scientific literature. Yoffe's delegation consisted of several eminent Russian professors, as well as a 27-year-old physicist, Pyotr Kapitsa, who was included in the role of delegation secretary and interpreter. It was his inclusion in this first mission that came to provide Kapitsa with the opportunity to study at Cambridge and to absorb values from Rutherford as a scientist and as a man. The newly established Soviet government immediately recognized Rutherford's outstanding contribution in physics. In 1922, he became a corresponding member of the USSR Academy of Sciences, and in 1925, he was elected as honorary member. More and more of Rutherford's books and articles came to be published in Russian translation. At the same time, Rutherford's Cambridge laboratory opened its doors to other Soviet physicists, including Yuri Khariton, Lev Landau, Georgy Gamov, Kirill Sinelnikov, and Alexander Leipunsky. Many Soviet scientists and some leading Soviet political figures visited the Cavendish laboratory and met with Rutherford, such as Yakov Frenkel, Nikolai Semyonov, Lev Teremin, and Nikolai Bukharin. It must be noted that to this day, a vast amount of information about Rutherford's Soviet student remains classified in Russian archives and inaccessible to scholars. The reason is that such Soviet scientists were to form the backbone of the nuclear committee under Stalin, some becoming the creators of the Soviet atomic bomb and heads of top secret laboratories. The life and work of New Zealand national and heritage hero Ernest Rutherford provides some excellent examples of the leadership we can learn from. One of the very first Russian students of Rutherford was a laboratory assistant at the chemical laboratory of St. Petersburg University, Georgy Antonov, who worked with Rutherford for 3 years from 1908 to 1911. Antonov was the grandson of the court doctor of Emperor Nicholas I and the son of bailiff of the St. Petersburg District Court. After his graduation from Moscow University in 1902, Antonov continued his research in the Department of Chemistry, where he studied surface phenomena of solutions. In 1906, at the age of 26, he discovered his famous rule, known today as Antonov's rule. In early 1908, Antonov traveled to Manchester to work on radioactivity in Rutherford's laboratory, where he focused on the chemical identification of the products of uranium decay. Rutherford praised Antonov's abilities and gave him excellent feedback. In 1911, his final year in Manchester, Antonov discovered, as he thought, the short-lived isotope thorium-231, and although Rutherford did not find any discrepancies in Antonov's experiments, this work was questioned in 1913 by Alexander Floch, Frederick Soddy's demonstrator, as he could not repeat the experiment with the same results. Being confident in his discovery, Antonov, who by then had left Rutherford's laboratory, was ready to find some funds and return to Rutherford's laboratory to carry out the experiment once again. But instead, Rutherford, having demonstrated his best leadership skills, asked Soddy to send Antonov some purified uranium so that Antonov could avoid the stress of traveling. After receiving the purified uranium, Antonov reported back to Rutherford that he had successfully repeated his experiment. The reputation of his laboratory at stake, Soddy decided to experiment to confirm this data himself. Soddy found out that Antonov was correct in saying that the new beta-emitting radio element that he called uranium Y existed. At the same time, however, Fleck was also partially correct in arguing that the chemical separation of uranium Y from uranium X was impossible. Rutherford was relieved that his initiative had not only saved the reputation of his Russian student, but also of his laboratory. In May 1912, Konstantin Yakovlev, the real name Redzhevsky, the 26-year-old son of collegiate counselor, arrived at Manchester to do practical research work in Rutherford's laboratory. Yakovlev had graduated with a first-degree diploma from the Physics and Mathematics Faculty of Moscow University in 1908 and was preparing for a professorship. Yakovlev's trip to Rutherford's laboratory was planned at short notice. A year earlier, over 130 liberal-minded university professors and researchers at Moscow University had resigned in what became known as the Kasso affair, a protest at the policy of then Minister of Public Education, Lev Kasso, against academic freedom. Upon his return to Russia in 1913, Yakovlev established a scientific and educational laboratory in radioactivity at the Physics and Mathematics faculty of Moscow University. He also published the first Russian textbook on these topics. Yakovlev left interesting and instructive recollections of his work with Rutherford in 1912-1913. If Rutherford wanted to carry out any experiment and get the desired result, he demanded that the job be done today, or at worst, tomorrow. From what and how the necessary installation would be assembled, he was not interested. And moreover, he was completely indifferent to its external appearance. Although he was remarkably straightforward with everyone and comported himself without any airs and graces and pulling of rank, everyone knew that he could not stand idleness. They knew that on other occasions he was harsh and very strict. The story was told of how one young researcher, having done his first work, came to thank him for his help, and then he asked what he should do now, because he had no plans of his own. Rutherford had lost his temper. Perhaps you should engage in commercial activities, as this place is not for you. And this is how the Russian physicist Shilov described the University of Manchester when he was visiting Rutherford's laboratory in May-June 1914. There are many women among the students, and one cannot fail to note, at least from a cursory external impression, a very simple and calm, purely comradely attitude between male and female students. There is not even a shadow of an unfriendly attitude that can be seen so often in Germany. The same should be said about the attitude towards foreigners, of which, however, there are not many here. Well, Jadwiga Schmidt was both a female and a foreigner. Following the example of the leading young female members of the nobility at the time, Schmidt was keenly interested in education and in personal independence. She was one of the very few women to work with both Madame Curie and Rutherford. Originally from Laude in Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, Schmidt left her family quite early to enroll at the Women's Pedagogical Institute in St. Petersburg. There she received a higher education at the Institute's Physics and Mathematics department. Until 1911, according to Russian law, women could not attend university classes and engage in scientific work. And so it was that after a couple of years teaching at secondary educational institutions for girls, Schmidt packed her bags for Paris to attend a course on radioactivity, the only one in the world at that time, which was taught by another female Pole from the Russian Empire, Maria Skłodowska-Curie. From Paris, Schmidt went on to Manchester in 1913. She worked with Rutherford in 1913-1914 and was mainly engaged in research of the absorption of gamma rays by gases. After her internship, when Schmidt returned to St. Petersburg, they continued to correspond. Schmidt's letters to Rutherford are full of gratitude and respect. Rutherford in his letters supported her, worried about her health, and shared with her the pain of the loss of his assistant, the brilliant scientist Henry Moseley, who had been killed in August 1915 at Gallipoli. In May 1914, 42-year-old Nikolai Shilov, by then an established Russian physicist and chemist, spent a month in Rutherford's laboratory in Manchester. Shilov had been a student of the creator of the first gas mask, Zelinsky, and later was acknowledged as one of the founders of the theory of coupled reactions and the modern theory of gas sorption. Once in Manchester and impressed by his meeting with Rutherford, the work of his laboratory and the university life, Shilov prepared an article and sent it to the Priroda Nature journal. There is another good tradition in Rutherford's laboratory that I should point out. Every day from 4 to 5 o'clock, everybody in the laboratory gathers together for tea in a special room. The professor also usually comes. The conversation revolves exclusively around scientific issues. Fresh impressions are shared about successes and failures. No one thinks of being secretive about their work and its results. They consult with each other, discuss things together. It's really nice to see how Rutherford, stammering a little, clearly and accurately formulates a question and is able quickly to get to the bottom of someone else's work and outline a plan for further low-key activities. I'm sure that in this atmosphere, comradely scientific conversation full of mutual trust and common interest, thoughts often arose that served as the nucleus of subsequent work. Shilov's wife, Vera Abrikosova, a granddaughter of the largest Russian confectionery manufacturer, was close friends with her former classmate, Natalia Sheremetevskaya, Countess Brasova, the wife of Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich Romanov. Since the morganatic marriage of the Grand Duke with the twice divorced daughter of a court lawyer was not approved, Emperor Nicholas II forbade his brother Mikhail and Natalia to return to Russia. And from the autumn of 1913, they resided in England. In the summer of 1914, they rented the castle estate Knebworth House, Hertfordshire, not far from London, and invited the Shilovs to stay with them. Making use of his connections in Germany and France, Nikolai Shilov got in touch with Rutherford and arranged to spend some productive time at his laboratory, which Shilov never visited before. Another part of Shilov's mission was to purchase a copy of Rutherford's laboratory equipment for the needs of the newly established Moscow Commercial Institute. The board of the institute included the richest Russian merchants and philanthropists such as Sava Mamontov, Pavel Tretyakov, Alexei Abrikosov, and others. By the time Shilov arrived to England, the cost of the duplicate laboratory equipment, 10,000 Tsarist rubles, about $500,000 in the gold equivalent current rate, had been transferred to the British side. Shilov's plan was to use a copy of Rutherford's laboratory as the most prestigious and expensive laboratory for physical chemistry in Russia. 2 years earlier, Shilov had been able to buy from Marie Curie the equipment needed to set up a radiological laboratory at the Moscow Commercial Institute. Sadly, the copies of Rutherford's laboratory equipment intended for Moscow became an early casualty of the war to end all wars. The ship carrying the equipment carefully selected by Rutherford was torpedoed and sunk. The only item that survived the journey to Russia was an exact copy of the miniature platinum crucible that Rutherford used for highly pure chemical reactions. Shilov had carried it with him on his return journey in a wooden box chest which easily fitted into his bag. This crucible, as well as some letters, diaries, and photographs taken by Shilov during his work with Rutherford and his stay in England, are today in the treasured possession of Nikolai Shilov's great-grandson, academician Boris Stechkin. Shilov's photos and letters to his wife Vera provide a rare primary Russian perspective on Rutherford and the state of academic affairs in Europe in the last summer before First World War. May, June 1914. Today, I should like to describe for you the laboratory personnel whom I managed to get to know a little. I'll start with Rutherford himself. He's a tall, dignified chap with the thoroughbred face of a real Englishman. Graying a little, he's 45, 46 years old. He's very kind to specialists, talks to them a lot and sensibly. When he speaks or thinks about a piece of work, he is oblivious to any extraneous sight or sound around. He practically does not intervene at all. And for this reason, for decency's sake, he appears once a day to say a few words. May, June 1914. I had an unexpected pleasure today. Rutherford came up to me in the laboratory, invited me to go for a car ride with his wife. He invites in turn all of his employees in pairs. Today it was my turn, with one of the Englishmen. At 4 o'clock, we showed up at Rutherford's apartment, drank tea, and went on a journey. I must tell you that in view of Rutherford's unfriendly attitude towards me, Shilov thought that Rutherford had taken offense because of some confusion that had arisen with the dates of a dinner that he had arranged for Shilov earlier. So I felt strange in his company. When I had dined with him, I had either been silent or had burbled something inaccurately. Thus, Lady Rutherford has got the idea that I don't speak any English. When Rutherford was sitting us in the car and put me next to her in the back, I could see on her face almost a look of suffering, that she would be going to have a boring time. I then summoned all my English language reserves, tried my very best, and began to engage her in conversation. The impact was as such as would have been created had a mute spoken. She became tremendously talkative and even admitted how difficult it sometimes was for her to engage with foreign students, and that she had been worried that the same would be the case with me. We drove quite a long way. The locality is beautiful, laid out like a park. It's hard to believe that one is just traveling in the countryside. Saturday, 13th of June, 1914. I have learned so much and can say frankly that I have so enjoyed my scientific work that my life in Manchester has already justified itself and will remain a vivid memory. The most well-known of Rutherford's Russian students, Pyotr Kapitsa, spent 13 years, from 1921 to 1934, at the Cavendish Laboratory, and later in the Mont Laboratory, which was specially built for him by Rutherford. He became a leading Soviet physicist and Nobel laureate, his main contributions to physics being in the field of low-temperature physics. For Pyotr Kapitsa, the personal and professional friendship with Rutherford was literally a matter of life and death. Just a year before Rutherford agreed to take Kapitsa on as his student in 1921, Kapitsa had suffered the tragedy of losing his own family, his wife and two small children, as well as his father in Spanish flu pandemic. Rutherford gave him hope, direction, and purpose to his life. It turned out that the two men, origin, age, and stage withstanding, had a great deal in common. Both were outsiders to the Cambridge boys. Aliens, witty, courageous, when it came to the protection of fellow scientists, foul of dreadful regimes, Nazi and Soviet Stalinist. In the 1930s, Rutherford, jointly with other scientists, established and became the president of the Academic Assistance Council, now called Council for At-Risk Academics, relocating Jewish scientists and their families expelled from universities and countries under Nazi dominion, and finding new employment for them. Pyotr Kapitsa was Rutherford's right hand in the Council's matters, arranging the translation of the pleas from German into English and sending them to Rutherford and other well-known academics. Copies are kept at the Kapitsa Museum archives. Back in Russia, Kapitsa saved several leading Soviet scientists, including the Nobel laureate Landau and Lipunsky, from Stalin's prison camps, gulags, and jail. Kapitsa called Rutherford by the sobriquet crocodile, which became a nickname for Lord Rutherford. One explanation is that Rutherford, intimidating for those in the laboratory, had heavy steps, and they always could hear him approaching, like the crocodile with the clock inside in Peter Pan. The crocodile became Kapitsa's mascot through his whole life. His memorial museum in Moscow has all sorts of crocodiles. In Cambridge, Kapitsa created his own Kapitsa Club, a unique platform where junior, on a par with senior scientists, could present and discuss their research. Rutherford was instrumental in having built for his Russian colleague the most expensive laboratory in the history of Cambridge to that time, the Royal Society Mont Laboratory, at the cost of £15,000, equivalent to about £1.1 million today. So Kapitsa could continue his work on intense magnetic fields. Rutherford invited Stanley Baldwin, the Chancellor of Cambridge University, who had served 3 times as British Prime Minister, to officially open the Mont Laboratory on 3rd February 1933. Kapitsa was the director of this laboratory until 1934. Returning to the USSR with his wife Anna in 1934 on a short visit for personal and professional reasons, Pyotr Kapitsa was prevented from leaving the USSR. Later, in recognition of his scientific brilliance, Kapitsa was made a member of the newly formed Soviet Nuclear Committee, responsible for a top-secret project, the development of the Soviet atomic bomb. Kapitsa's wife Anna had to go back to England without Pyotr to look after their 2 young sons in hope that her husband would be allowed to travel back to his laboratory and family in Cambridge. For most of his time without Anna, Kapitsa was quartered in the Metropole Hotel near the Kremlin. 2 NKVD or KGB forerunner agents were assigned to follow him everywhere. His former Russian colleagues were afraid to communicate with him. For his part, Rutherford fought for Kapitsa. He wrote several letters to the Soviet embassy in London, collected signatures from leading international scientists to protest against Kapitsa's detention and treatment by the Soviet authorities, and went to the media. It appears also that there was a plan to try to extract Kapitsa from the USSR by submarine. All Rutherford's efforts to have Kapitsa return to Cambridge were in vain. At that point, Kapitsa was writing to his wife that he was as down emotionally as at the times when he had lost his entire family to the Spanish flu 14 years ago. And Rutherford decided to act. In 1935, he persuaded the Cambridge authorities to sell the scientific equipment in the Mont laboratories to the Soviets, so that Kapitsa would be able to continue his work in the USSR. Once the Soviets agreed to pay for the Mont laboratory, Kapitsa felt safe again to write to his mentor. They were never to meet again. Kapitsa especially missed the long and stimulating conversations he had had with Rutherford while walking after their regular Trinity College dinners. One particular discussion Kapitsa remembered well. After attending a performance of Chekhov's play Uncle Vanya in Cambridge, Rutherford told Kapitsa that as he had watched the play, he had felt like Uncle Vanya. He too hated idleness, and Rutherford had added he would shoot like Uncle Vanya at the pedantic and full of importance professor for whom Uncle Vanya had worked his whole life, but who had turned out to be nothing but a fake.
But for 25 years, I've lived within these four walls, buried like a mole with Maman. All our thoughts and feelings were for you alone. By day, we talked of you and of your works. When we mentioned your name, it was with reverence. We wasted our nights reading books and magazines, for which now I have my deepest contempt. I don't know what else you want. To ask you what a being of a higher order. We knew all your articles by heart, but now my eyes are open. I see it all. You write about art, but you know nothing about art. You've deceived. No, stop him. I'm going. Oh, no, I will not be silent. Stop! I'm finished. You have destroyed my life. I have lived. Thanks to you, I've ruined and wasted the best years of my life. You're my bitterest enemy. I know what it is you want from me. What right have you to speak to me like this? You non-entity. If the estate is yours, take it. I don't want to. I'll get away from this hell this very minute. I can't stand it any longer. I had talent, I had courage, I had intelligence. If I had had a normal life, I might have been a Schopenhauer or a Dostoevsky. No, I'm talking like an idiot. I'm going out of my mother. You were that it sounds like No, Mother, what am I doing? No. That's anything. I know what I must do. You shall remember me. Take that madman away! I cannot live under the same roof with him. He's always there, almost beside me. Well, let him move into the village, or into the line, or I will move. But remain in the same house with him, I cannot. Oh, we will leave this place today. We will pack up this very minute. Creature.
Father, you must be merciful. Uncle Vanya and I are so unhappy. Oh, Father, remember how when you were younger, Uncle Vanya and Grandmama sat up all night copying your books all night. Uncle Vanya and I have worked without resting. We were afraid to spend a farthing on ourselves. We sent it all to you. We did not eat the bread of idleness. Oh, I'm saying it's all wrong, Father. But you ought to understand him. Father, you must be merciful. Make it up with him, for God's sake. I beseech you.
Very well, I talk to him. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm not angry with him. You must admit he's bearing the restraint. He's sorry.
The ganders will cackle a bit and leave off. They will cackle and leave off. But you're shivering as though you were frozen there, little orphan. God is merciful. A cup of light flower water, a raspberry tea, and it will pass. Don't grieve, little orphan. Oh, what's it to do? They make the ganders plague take them. Oh, Brother Richard, take them.
Oh, get him, Doctor. He's lying. take it. What am I doing? What am I doing?
In their later letters to each other kept in the Kapitsa Memorial Museum in Moscow, two scientists declare their friendship and exchange philosophical and witty observations. On 13th of September 1937, Kapitsa wrote to Rutherford, "I should love to have a little stroll in the world, to see the French exhibition, to look you up in Cambridge. It is absolutely idiotic the way we Russian scientists are pickled here. And the people seem not to realize how bad this is for the development of our sciences. But probably I shall be the last one to be permitted to go out. I hope you had a good summer rest and have again plenty of energy for your work. Please do write to me. It is great comfort to me to get news from you and from Cambridge. I hope to write more often to you now that it is much easier back in town where I can find peace in my study. I imagine all your grandchildren are quite grown up, and soon you would be a great-grandfather." That was Kapitsa's last letter to Rutherford, who in his turn replied to Kapitsa on 9th of October 1937, only 10 days before his sudden death. "I'm glad to say that I'm feeling physically pretty fit, but I wish that life was not quite as strenuous in term time. I hope it will be not too long before you are able to come over and see us all again. At the moment, I cannot make any plans ahead, but sometime I hope I may have the opportunity of seeing you." The legacy of Lord Rutherford was kept alive in the USSR by Kapitsa through his commitment to science for the benefit of humanity. Kapitsa was the only senior Soviet scientist who dared to oppose the directive on Stalin's instruction of the NKVD chief Lavrentiy Beria, then in charge of the Soviet atomic bomb project. Rutherford was successful in attracting and nurturing many outstanding Russian students and visiting scholars, including several Nobel laureates. Most of them have left their mark on the history of world science. He valued their originality, creativity, and independent thought. Paradoxically, those who were trained by Rutherford before the Russian Revolution of 1917 are almost unknown to the wider audience. The Soviet government, in the creation of its own brave new world, sought to erase all the successes of Imperial Russia, including scientific achievements. Among the scientists erased from history were Georgy Antonov, who never accepted the Bolsheviks and immigrated, and Vasily Borodovsky, who was one of the founders of Russian radium production but died prematurely. Those of Rutherford's students who fled the USSR to live and work overseas were similarly wiped from the pages of Soviet science, as in the case of Georgy Gamov. Interestingly, later in his interview to the American radio in 1960s, Gamov admitted that was Rutherford who lent him the money to continue his journey from Europe to the US. Most Soviet students of Rutherford who had returned to the Soviet Union after their training at Rutherford's laboratory in Cambridge became classified. They started to work in the sensitive area of nuclear physics, and many of them were prohibited to travel abroad till 1960s and after. For example, Pyotr Kapitsa was involved in the Stalin Nuclear Committee. Yuli Khariton became the chief engineer of the Soviet atomic bomb. Alexander Lipunsky and Kirill Sinelnikov also worked in secrecy, developing nuclear reactors. Rutherford raised the status of the Russian scientists by keeping them as a part of the world academic elite. He gave them hope that it is possible to keep physics as an oasis of intellectual freedom, and to fight for the peaceful use of science to the benefit of humanity and for the right of a scientist to be recognized as equal to the statesman and politician. He also gave them the courage of their convictions, That is, to be true to the scientific calling and to be true to themselves, despite the colossal challenges any individual faced in Stalin times when conformity with the doctrine of the day was possibly a passport for remaining alive, whereas the non-conformity was a likely ticket to the Gulag, if not execution. In the 1960s, small amounts of new synthetic chemical element were produced in the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in the Soviet Union and at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California. The priority of discovery and the naming were the subject of dispute for almost 40 years. In 1997, the teams involved resolved the dispute and adopted the current name, Rutherfordium. It remains a matter of conjecture. Would the Russians have agreed to compromise had it not been in honor of Lord Rutherford, who had contributed so much to Russian nuclear physics, but to recognize a different foreign scientist without such Russian connection? As Pyotr Kapitsa noted in his opening speech at the International Conference in honor of the 100th anniversary of Ernest Rutherford's birth, which was held in Russia in 1971, people like Rutherford ceased to be the national pride of the countries where they were born and where they worked. They become the pride of all mankind.
Use of high voltages. In this way, we have been able to obtain for our experiments in transmutation intense beams of protons and alpha particles, while the discovery of heavy hydrogen has given us a new projectile of remarkable efficiency in transmuting atoms. By these and other new methods, we are able to break up atoms in a great variety of ways and produce a number of new elements, or rather isotopes of known elements not observed before. Some of these are found to be unstable and break up according to a definite law like a radioactive element. The discovery in these experiments of neutrons, uncharged atoms of mass 1, has proved of great significance and importance, and has given us a much clearer understanding of the actual structure of nuclei. This new field of work is now attracting much attention throughout the scientific world, and the progress of our knowledge is very rapid. We are witnessing today the rise of a new department of fundamental knowledge, nuclear chemistry, which is concerned with reactions and changes which may be brought about in the minute world of the atomic nucleus.
Thank you.